We will now act on House File 83. Is there any discussion? The member from Hennepin, Representative the member from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but the nature in which this bill passed through civil law yesterday was embarrassing, to say the least. Number one, it was a direct violation of Rule 6.22 under our temporary rules, and that the chair did not take public comment on the nature of this bill, and it passed through in an abbreviated fashion. Now, I understand the chair and many members of the GOP were a half hour late for that committee, while the DFL members and folks waiting to testify waited patiently for a half an hour. That happens sometimes in clement weather. However, that is not a reason to usurp the rules of this institution, but more importantly, to deny members of the public an opportunity to be heard on this bill. We explained to you the consequences of what would happen when you attempted to push this bill through on the first day of our work here. And it didn't work because you didn't have the support of the DFL members, but you decided the following week to still push it through in other ways. And what happened is you have an abbreviated hearing where people don't have the opportunity to be heard on it. We had a commissioner who was there explaining all the things that had to happen for this bill not to be an epic failure, and those were ignored, and it was pushed through to the following, it was pushed through to the next committee. That right now is something that needs to be changed with the re-referral. It needs to go back to civil law where you can have a real hearing on the nature of the bill, and so that all of you can understand what you're really doing with this bill. Commissioner of MMB appeared and stated that the web for this bill, the website would need to be shared, including information on the date of birth, income, and residence. An audit trail would also need to be set up for revenue to audit who is accessing the data. And all of this would have to be done before the data is destroyed. And there was a question from one of the GOP members in committee about how all of this would be verified. And the commissioner explained that because it would have to go through the health plans, the fact that a person has health insurance would automatically be verified. There would be no cash payments to an individual. So you have an opportunity under the governor's plan really to get this done for folks, but instead you're saying, no, we want to have our cake and eat it too, and in order to get there, we're going to trample on the rules and the rights of the public to testify. Now, you may think this is just a partisan attack. Well, first of all, I'm in the minority, so that's kind of my job. But number two, Garofalo knows that. He's done that for years. But the second part is you are destined for a really problematic bill, and you cannot do, as Representative Hoppe said when this bill was brought up the first day of our real job doing this on floor session, and as Chair Scott said the other day, we'll work it out in conference committee. Bad things happen when you do that. Both sides know that bad things happen that you do that. When you run something on the flagpole and see who salutes, you end up with a bad result. So I encourage you, you've already moved the bill on, you can still hear this, have a hearing in civil law on this bill in a real way, and so I would ask that this matter be re-referred from rules back to civil law so we can have a real hearing on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, in addition to the fact that there was not a public hearing on House File number 83 in violation of Rule 6.22, members, Rule 4.16 is specifically in the rules related to data practices. Members, any bill that deals with data practices is supposed to go to the Data Practices Committee. And the reason is because we know that sometimes in conference committee, folks make changes in this area that ultimately have other effect in other areas of the law. So, members, I brought it up last night to Representative Scott and asked her if she would bring her own bill back to committee so that we could fully vet and make sure these issues are correct. So hopefully she's not surprised today that I'm making a motion to bring it back because I asked her to make it herself to bring it back to committee. Members, this language was amended on in the Commerce Committee to House File 1. And so House File 1 is still moving through the process, and it has this language. What I'm asking is that House File 83 be sent back to the Civil Law Committee so that the committee can actually do its work and get it done correctly. Members, there are some people in the public in the area of data practices that we hear from all the time. They always testify on all issues related to data practices. They were in the room, and they were not given the opportunity to be heard. I don't always agree with them. Sometimes I do, but I believe that they always bring an important point to the debate, and usually it helps us find a hole that needs to be fixed. Members, I think we all agree that protecting the public's data is one of the key things that we need to do around here, because sometimes when government gets too much information about someone, ultimately it ends up in the wrong hands. We need to make sure that we get this language right, and I would ask that you send House File 83 back to Civil Law so we can get it done right. And again, the proposal is going to go forward in House File 1, and you can debate House File 1 and all the other issues that relate to it as that moves through the process. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Further discussion on the committee report on House File 83. The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to clear the record, there was public testimony taken on this bill. Thank you.
Any further discussion? The member from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Scott yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Scott, what public testimony was taken on the bill?
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you. The Commissioner of MMB was there. He gave public testimony.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think most members of the body know that that's not public testimony. We have, Representative Scott, people who come in and testify on the bill, and we ask for public comment at the end of other testifiers. The Commissioner of MMB was there to speak specifically to the parts of the bill that he was going to have to administer based upon your directives in the bill. That's not public testimony. I mean, that would be if the governor came in and testified. There was no public testimony, members. I ask you to vote green on this motion. Thank you.
Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm actually going to ask you all to open up Rule 6.22, public testimony in the rules. And it specifically says that public testimony from proponents and opponents must be allowed on every bill or resolution before a standing committee, division, or subcommittee of the House. In fact, there was no offer for people who were not in favor of the bill to testify, nor people who were in favor of it. Now, in Commerce, I specifically heard this bill as well, and I specifically raised the issues that we did not address in the Data Practices Subcommittee, and Chair Hoppe was happy to allow there to be public testimony about those proposals. The problem is people who care about data practices were not in the room. They weren't in the room. So members, again, this language is already in House File 1. This proposal will be moving through the process. I ask that you send House File 83 back to committee so that we have the ability to actually fix what's wrong with the proposal and make certain that when it comes to people's data, so the data they're going to collect is they're going to collect people's tax information. They're going to collect whether or not they have insurance. They're going to collect whether or not they are residents of the state of Minnesota. You are virtually creating a new mini MNsure database set, and you are not making certain that the data requirements are clear in the law and that penalties for improper use are where they need to be. I'd ask you to send it back.
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Just a reminder, there was public testimony given yesterday, and I would urge people to vote against. Okay, the Speaker will clarify which way the votes will go. Thank you.
The motion before the body is a motion to adopt the committee report on House File 83. A green vote would be in favor of adoption of the committee report. A red vote would be against adoption of the committee report. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the motion. There being 75 ayes and 55 nays, the report from the Committee on Civil Law relating to House File 83 is adopted.